Hello, my name is Rebecca Hale, and I know what it feels like to be erased by the people who should have stood beside me. On the day my brother was honored, my name was missing from the list as if I didn't exist. I stood outside the gate watching my own family walk past me like I was a stranger. But life has a way of turning silence into strength. What happened next not only shattered their illusion, it reminded me and everyone else who I truly am. My name wasn't on the list, and that was no accident. The petty officer's tablet glowed beneath the spring sun, his brow tight as he scrolled. The line at the security gate hummed with rehearsed precision, families waving flags, veterans in pressed uniforms, children bouncing on their toes. I stood still, coat buttoned to the collar, hands folded as if I had been practicing patience for years. He tried again. "Ma'am, could you repeat the spelling?" I gave it slowly. He tapped, searched, squinted, then exhaled. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on the guest list for Commander Daniel Hale." His tone was trained for disappointment, not confrontation. The words slid into me with a dull familiarity. I'd felt them before, though, never in a uniformed voice. A flash of childhood returned, family photos where my body was cropped at the edge, my smile absent from the framed memory. Today, it was sharper. This was no oversight. It was a deliberate erasure. "Understood," I said, voice flat, refusing him the satisfaction of seeing me crack. The gates opened wider. Guests streamed through, officers decorated with medals, parents with proud grins, camera crews snapping images. Somewhere in the tide of movement, my mother's pearl earrings glinted. My father's posture carried the easy confidence of a man who believed his legacy secure. They did not glance back. Why would they? In their version of the Hale family, I had already been erased. Then Daniel arrived. White uniform ribbons, a lined smile crafted to perfection. He strode past as if the walkway were his personal stage. His eyes flicked over me once, sharp, dismissive. He leaned toward his wife and muttered just loud enough. She forgot to RSVP. The cruelty was casual, almost lazy, like a habit he never questioned. A smirk tugged at his mouth, polished and practiced for the cameras waiting ahead. I almost laughed because in his mind the script was already finished. He was the chosen one, and I was the shadow who had wandered too close to the light. The petty officer shifted uncomfortably beside me as if he recognized that humiliation wasn't part of his duty. He started to say something, maybe to soften the sting, but I held up a hand. "It's fine." My voice was calm, measured. I had trained it to be unshakable. Around us, the crowd thickened. Brass instruments tuned in the distance, a bright metallic buzz cutting through the morning air. Children waved miniature flags that snapped in rhythm with the wind. The buzz of anticipation climbed, an entire base ready to celebrate the Hale name, though only one sibling had been invited to stand in the sun. I stood at the margin, coat heavy on my shoulders, waiting. Not for permission, not for forgiveness, just for the right moment. I had been invisible before. I could bear it a little longer. Then I heard it. The low rumble of a government SUV rolling to a deliberate stop. Black paint glinted under the light-tinted windows, sealing off the world inside. Conversations faltered. Even the petty officer's straightened clipboard pressed to his chest. The window lowered. Slow, deliberate, like a curtain before an unplanned scene. The man inside didn't need to announce himself. The air shifted before his voice even carried. Steel gray hair, eyes that missed nothing. Admiral Rayburn. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at me. His words fell like iron, measured and final. "Stand down, ensign. She outranks you." I wasn't unloved. I was unseen. The memory arrives like an old photograph, edges curled, colors fading, but the sting still sharp. The Hale house in the late 90s smelled faintly of polish and starch, a permanent undertone of duty. My father's voice carried through the living room as he guided Daniel's small hands over a tin of shoe polish. The lid popped open with a crisp snap, the black paste glistening like tar in the afternoon sun. Circular motion, steady pressure, my father instructed. His tone was patient, almost reverent. The shoes sat like artifacts on the step, and Daniel followed each movement with solemn focus. I sat beside them, a second tin in my lap, small fingers itching to try. I held it out once, hoping for an invitation. My father never looked. Daniel's smile was reflected in the leather he polished brighter than my presence ever was. The years stretched, but the script rarely changed. My brother always stood center stage rehearsing lines he never had to memorize. At 12, I brought home a ribbon from the regional science fair, blue crisp, with my name etched in careful letters. My project had mapped sonar detection patterns, a design that fascinated the judges enough to give me the highest score. I walked into dinner that night, certain my parents would finally see me. The table was already crowded with celebration. A cake sat in the middle, decorated with a frosting anchor. Daniel had passed his ROTC exam with top marks. My father carved the first slice, my mother raised her glass, and the conversation circled him like a fleet around its flagship. I slid my ribbon onto the table, a bright blue whisper among plates and forks. No one noticed. My fork clinked against the dish as I ate in silence. The ribbon stayed untouched, eventually folded into my pocket. In the backyard, the walls of the house displayed photographs like military banners, Daniel in uniform, Daniel at practice, Daniel shaking hands with dignitaries. I searched for myself, but my face was always at the edge, blurred, cropped, or absent altogether. One frame showed the family lined up at a parade. I remembered being there, yet the print had been trimmed, so that only Daniel stood between my parents, all smiles, the perfect portrait. I became the invisible margin. The worst cut didn't come from silence. It came from words. One afternoon, my mother stood at the fence speaking to a neighbor. I lingered near the porch, book pressed to my chest. The neighbor asked politely, "And your daughter? She's in the Navy too, isn't she?" My mother's laugh floated light, dismissive. "Rebecca never really fit the Navy mold. Daniel was born for it." The words fell like a hammer striking glass. The neighbor nodded, conversation drifting on, but my ears rang with the sentence. I didn't cry. I didn't protest. I learned something sharper, that silence could protect me better than any outburst. To argue was to be scolded for wanting attention. To stay quiet was to remain intact. So silence became my armor. I wore it at family dinners, at ceremonies where Daniel stood tall, and I stood behind at holidays, where his achievements filled the air while mine dissolved in the corners. My father's proud lessons never reached me. My mother's praise was a currency she spent only on her son. I carried my own victories folded into pockets, tucked into notebooks, hidden in drawers. Looking back now, I see how invisibility taught me discipline. I observed from the edges, storing every detail like classified intelligence. Where Daniel learned to shine shoes, I learned to disappear. Where he raised his voice to command, I lowered mine, until it carried only inside my own head. If they wouldn't see me, I'd serve where no one could. They thought I quit. In truth, I went deeper than they could imagine. The war room hummed like a sealed engine. Blue light from wall screens washed across faces bent toward keyboards. The glass tables freckled with reflections of flight paths and signal waterfalls. 2022, the Pentagon at night. Clocks along the bulkhead marched in offsets, Zulu, Bahrain, Norfolk, reminding us that somebody's dawn was always arriving with a demand. Encrypted comms ticked in my ear, a pulse that never quite aligned with my breathing. On the main display, the Gulf played out as a maze of lanes and ghost signatures. Friendly icons flickered where a task force formed its arrowhead, a neat geometry that looked brave, and to anyone who'd ever been shot at, dangerously predictable. The chatter tightened. Unidentified packets spoofing Blue Force beacons, a watch officer said, voice thin. Leak vector unknown. I leaned over the ops table. Show me the delta in timing drift. A slab of numbers obeyed. The pattern was wrong for weather or chance. Someone had threaded a counterfeit current through our systems close enough to trust, sharp enough to kill. Minutes remained before deployment. I remembered the lesson I'd learned young: when you aren't seen, you see everything. Route Bravo is burned, I told the room. Kill emitters on approach. Push decoys on the outer lane, stagger by 7 seconds. Reassign screen to south. Flip the comms to narrow beam and pull the task force 5 nautical miles east, slow by 3 knots. Make them think we're late. An analyst hesitated. Ma'am, we're past go, no go. We're not past alive. Or not, I said. Execute. Orders leapt from console to console. The map shivered blue, shifted red, lagged a set of false teeth suddenly biting air. In my ear, the encrypted feed flattened, then steadied. I watched the trap we hadn't set for ourselves close on nothing at all. Task force reporting, clean the comms, Chief said, surprise softening into relief. A murmur rolled through the floor like a tide pulling back. I allowed myself one breath, no more. Capture the sequence, I said. Label every step. I want the after-action bulletproof. Across the table, Admiral Rayburn's silhouette lifted from the dark. He'd been there the whole time, letting the room find its spine. He met my eyes, once a nod that said enough, and nothing at all, then vanished into the background radiation of authority. The printer in the corner started its soft bureaucratic stutter, forms, annexes, timestamps, the paperwork heartbeat of war. I walked over and gathered the warm pages, the ink setting like nightfall. At the final sheet, the line waited, signature, rank, time. R. Hale. I pressed the pen, signed the work I would never claim out loud, and felt the way triumph becomes discipline when sealed in a folder. A red border stamped across the cover, secret, Orcon, no foreign. The custodian slid the report into a pouch, heat-welded the edge, and locked it into a case whose hinges sounded like a vault closing on a life. Hours later, the public feed ran its sanitized ribbon, commendation for rapid adjustment of strike deployment. The name attached looked familiar in the way a mirror can lie. Commander Hale, it read. I stared at the crawl until the letters lost their edges and became static. The room did not look up. They had seen this before. I did not argue. The mission had held. The map had not bled. I filed the sting alongside 100 disciplined silences and returned to the work that no one photographed. Some truths are not fragile. They are merely deferred. One day they'll see whose name was on the page. My mother's words erased me more completely than any missing line on a list. The seating rows fanned out like white-laced runways, place cards crisp as orders. None bore my name. I chose the back, a folding chair near the aisle where the brass band's valves clicked and the smell of polish hung in the air. Families traded hugs. Reporters drifted like gulls' badges, flashing questions already sharpened. My mother stood 3 rows up, pearls fixed, smile tuned for public use. My father's shoulders were square, the old academy posture he never took off. Daniel hovered a few steps away, laughing with a Captain Claire, pressing a crease in his sleeve, as if the world were exactly as it should be. A reporter slid beside my parents' notebook, ready. Mrs. Hale, a few words about your son's promotion. Margaret's voice carried in that soft, performative way I remembered. Daniel has always embodied service. Discipline, grace, he was born to the uniform. Another hand lifted. And your daughter Rebecca, will she be joining the family for photos? The pause was brief, but it cut. My mother's smile did not falter. We don't talk about Rebecca's career, she said lightly, a line so practiced it sounded like a compliment. The pen hovered, then scratched. A camera clicked. Wind tugged at the bun at her nape. She smoothed it without breaking step. The reporter tried again. Has Rebecca remained in the Navy? My mother's eyes slid past me like searching for an exit. She left years ago. The words were light, but they landed with guided accuracy. Heads tilted. The neighbor behind me repeated them as if confirming a rumor she preferred. I kept my gaze forward, letting the noise move around me like tide around a piling. The band rehearsed a bar of the anthem. Sunlight bellied the flags. The bass seemed to inhale. A second reporter younger raised her voice. "Is that permanent?" Ma'am Margaret brightened. "Rebecca chose civilian life. It's better that way." There it was, the final polish on a mission. Claire glanced back, a brief confusion crossing her face before she turned to Daniel. My father nodded along, consenting to a story that cost him nothing. Whispers braided from row to row, quick and efficient like a signal on clean fiber. A lens found my face, then drifted away, unsure what it would catch. The old ache, the practiced vanishing act, reached for me like a familiar coat. I pressed my palms to my knees. I had learned to survive this after so many dinners where a ribbon meant less than a cake, after so many frames where I blurred at the edge. Their version of me was convenient, empty, quiet, unthreatening. The version I carried was built from work no camera could see. Engines sounded at the perimeter road, a low, disciplined thunder. The aisle beside me cleared as ushers moved to position. Reporters marked pages and checked batteries. I watched the light slide over the brass rail at the end of my row and let the world stack its assumptions one more time. I kept breathing slow and even. Still. If they erased me, someone else wrote me back in. The first time my family heard my true title, it wasn't from me. Rayburn stepped out of the SUV as if the asphalt had been waiting for his weight. The petty officer snapped straighter, tablet forgotten. The gate seemed to gather its breath. I didn't move. Years of standing invisible had taught me how to let a moment arrive. His shadow crossed my shoes, and then his hand, dry steady, closed around mine with the authority of a door locking. "Admiral Hale," he said, voice carrying clean over the crowd. "We were expecting you." Gasps rippled. Cameras pivoted with the same hungry precision that had always adored my brother. Margaret's smile stalled, pearl bright and brittle. Robert's jaw adjusted, the kind a man makes when his compass bends. Daniel froze mid-step, his grin left aground. "Stand down," Rayburn told the gate guard without looking. The young man swallowed and set the tablet aside, eyes wide at the sudden rewrite of hierarchy. Rayburn gestured, and the aisle opened ahead of us, a bright corridor of uniforms and curiosity. I felt 100 assessments click into place, strangers tallying rank, posture, possibility. We walked. Each pace burned away a thin layer of old humiliation. Boots thudded, chairs scraped, lenses whispered. The first salutes were tentative, then inevitable. Protocol has a way of correcting the world. I returned each one measured and unhurried, the way you align a sight picture before you squeeze the trigger. A photographer lifted his camera, then lowered it again, as if the frame he wanted had changed while he was choosing it. At the front row, an ensign sprang up so fast his cap rocked. He pointed flustered at a card that read, "Rear ADM. Fletcher." Rayburn gave a nod. The ensign removed the card and stepped aside, cheeks red with a cocktail of embarrassment and awe. I sat, not in challenge, not in apology, simply occupying the space that had always been mine when the time arrived. Across the aisle, my mother's fingers worried the edge of her clutch. My father blinked hard. Daniel's chest rose once sharply. I let their faces pass through my field of view, the way you scan a Horizon Note store, move on. Then gently, I unfastened my coat. The fabric gave with a small sigh, lapels falling back. Morning light found the metal on my shoulders and filled it until the stars seemed lit from within. Twin points, simple as geometry, undeniable as gravity. There was no triumph in the motion, only truth. The band nearby quieted mid-scale. Sound takes orders too. Someone started to clap, then thought better of it. Applause would have turned the moment into theater. This wasn't theater. It was a correction, and corrections should be quiet enough to hear the old lie leaving. Rayburn remained beside me without encroaching, a witness and a wall. The petty officer who'd searched for my name stood a few rows back, face pale with relief. I almost wanted to thank him for trying. A reporter mouthed a word, "Admiral," before writing it down like a confession. I felt the ceremony pivot a ship answering a new helm, slow at first and then inexorable. I folded my coat across my lap and rested my hands on it, palms steady. I did not look at Daniel again. The rank already had. The rank speaks a language even pride obeys. I let the silence do its work. The flag stirred, the sky held, and the base for one breath remembered that truth outranks narrative. National anthem strikes up. For the first time, eyes shift from Daniel to her. For years, cameras captured my brother's every move. Today, they faltered at mine. Sun glazed the parade ground, turning brass into coins. Reporters clustered by the rope line lenses stitched to Daniel as he worked the officers' row with practiced ease. I kept my seat at the aisle, coat, folded stars bear a weight that needed no explanation. Commander Hale over here. Flashes cracked like dry twigs, then hesitation. A rhythm broke, a lens drifted, a second followed. Doubt arrived on cue. Rayburn stood a half step behind me, a fixed point other compasses quietly adjusted to. He didn't speak. Protocol did salutes given chairs seated the choreography of rank redrawing the day. Margaret's smile tightened. Her hand cinched her handbag until the leather whitened. Robert's calm took on hairline cracks. Claire smoothed a cuff that didn't need smoothing. The press didn't rush. They learned. A young lieutenant hovered near them, face too open for this business. Leaning toward a colleague, he couldn't hold it in. "That's her. She saved us in the Gulf." The words didn't carry far, but truth echoes under armor. One camera dipped. Another slid toward me, then wavered between us as if unsure which future would sell. The lieutenant realized what he'd said and clamped his mouth, lungs forgetting how to breathe. I didn't turn. He didn't need trouble, and I didn't need thanks. Sun pressed the back of my neck. The band rehearsed a bright fragment, a coin tossed and caught. For years, family portraits trimmed me from the margin. Now a different frame widened, reluctant, inevitable. Not applause, orientation. "Admiral Hale, ma'am, could we?" A reporter began, already lowering his voice from shout to address. He didn't finish. He looked through the viewfinder, then away, confirming that reality matched the rulebook. I nodded once, granting nothing, refusing nothing. I was here for a ceremony, not a spectacle, though the ceremony had decided spectacle could wait its turn. Rayburn angled just enough for a shaft of light to catch my insignia. A flinch went through the press line, quiet, collective recognition. One photographer, older strap mended by tape, lifted his camera, hesitated, and made the simplest correction a professional can. He lowered the camera. He bowed his head slightly. The gesture rippled me more than any headline. A private salute paid in humility rather than ink. I returned it with a spare incline, the kind you give a field order. No flourish. If justice needs choreography, it isn't justice yet. Around us, conversation recalibrated. Names traded, assumptions amended, angles shifting by degrees. Margaret's laugh came too brightly, like glass buff, to hide a crack. Robert checked his watch and looked away. Claire's fingers floated at her throat, then fell. I breathed evenly, spine aligned with the chair, letting stillness speak. I had spent a decade mastering the art of not interrupting. Now the row was learning it too. Let silence be instructional. Let rank be grammar. Cameras skated the aisle like cautious skaters testing new ice. Curiosity settled into respect, heavier, less noisy. Down the row, a PAO briefed a reporter in the language of policy, and the reporter wrote slower vowels, long with care. The sun slipped behind a cloud and returned stronger. Flags answered with a firmer snap. Ushers moved late arrivals to standing room. I kept my eyes forward, a fixed horizon. I wasn't chasing a lens. I never had. I was letting it arrive when it had earned the right. Daniel notices the lens shift away. His jaw muscles clench. He had memorized every word until my eyes rewrote the page. The stage threw his voice farther than he deserved. Microphone hum, flags popping, sun on brass. Daniel stood in center of applause and rode it like a helmsman. I kept my seat at the aisle, shoulders square, hands folded over my coat, the twin stars catching light to remind the front row what protocol meant. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, cadence, crisp vowels polished by repetition. Today is not about one officer. It is about the chain of trust, of duty, of service. The crowd answered with claps. He spoke of heritage mentors, sees hard lessons, the comfort of orders that arrive on time. He listed campaigns like ports of call, implying a captain who never doubted charts. He was good as always. That had never been the question. Confidence is easy when your story is read to you nightly. I watched the rhythm set in pause, smile, salute. Laughter at a line about chow. Gravity at a line about sacrifice. His jaw, I noticed, stayed loose. Then the page turned. And of course, he said, none of us stands alone. The script wheeled toward family. His eyes lifted to the rows that had always belonged to him and met mine. The pause was short enough to deny, long enough to hear. A thin, metallic thread ran through the speakers. His jaw tightened, childhood memory flicking on like a warning light. My wife Claire, he said too quickly. Applause. My parents Robert and Margaret Hale. More applause, louder, a refuge he could hide in. He found the prompter again, but the words blurred where my name would have forced them to make room. He breathed, reset. To every family who sends a sailor into the unknown, he said, "You are the reason we return better than we left." He did not look at me again. The omission was clean, deliberate, like trimming a photograph until only the preferred subject remains. The square did not cheer. Not yet. Sound leaned forward and listened. A gull crossed the light. A cap rolled under a chair and no one fetched it. The brass section lowered their instruments an inch, unsure if the cue had passed them. I felt many hearts holding the same beat. Memory unspooled a 12-year-old me placing a blue ribbon on a table crowded by a cake. The present coiled around the silence, then let it ring. Even pride knows when it has swallowed something it cannot keep. Daniel recovered, he always did, steering back into charts that had never betrayed him. He thanked commanders and crews, praised the enlisted backbone, the spouses who held the line. His grin returned, but the hinge held grit. The tide of applause rolled back in obedient but lower at the crest. I kept still. A lighthouse does not wave its arms. At my edge, Rayburn's profile held granite that knew how to breathe. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Rank speaks, and when it does, good men stop guessing. Daniel closed with a blessing on the flag, a caution against complacency, the promise of a ready watch. The final line landed, and for a heartbeat the square waited. Then applause, respectful, trimmed. Not the roar of a myth perfectly told, but the measured answer to a story with a sentence missing. He stepped back from the podium. The grin faltered. On the big screen, the camera tried to crop me out and couldn't. The edge of my shoulder star insisted on existing. He turned to acknowledge the front row and caught me looking back without expression. His teeth clicked once, a tiny spark inside the engine of his face. Rayburn leans toward me, murmuring, "This is only the beginning." Some victories are signed in silence, but silence does not erase the ink. Front row, knees aligned, I watched the parade ground recompose around rank. Sun pooled on my lap. The coat lay folded steady. Reporters kept their distance, swapping lenses for longer ones, questions turning to whisper. Somewhere behind me, Claire inhaled too sharply, hearing the family story spring a leak. I let the noise move past and let memory move in. Summer 2022, the Pentagon's war room, a reef of glass and glow. On the map, the Gulf showed its veins. In my ear, encrypted pulses climbed and fell. Spoofed beacons skated our perimeter. The task force arrowed into geometry that would have looked brave until it died. I didn't raise my voice. I rerouted the world, cut the emitters, decoy the outer lane. Pull 5 east, slow 3, I told the floor. Orders went out like stitches closing a wound not yet cut. The picture redrew blue in place, red a breath too late. The room exhaled. Rayburn stood on the far side of the table reading the room, more than the map trusting me to do the math. Printers murmured into the hours. Ink settled like night. I signed the after-action and watched my name vanish beneath a seal. Secret, Orcon, no foreign. The pouch hissed shut. Days later, the public ribbon crawled across a screen commendation for rapid adjustment Commander Hale. I read the words until they weathered to pattern. I did not correct the crawl. I corrected the next problem. A ripple of whispering tugged me back to the present. 2 rows ahead, a junior officer leaned to a reporter and said a sentence he'd later pretend not to remember. Rayburn, behind my right shoulder, pressed assumptions into shape. Daniel, 3 sections over, smiled too widely at a colonel, then lost it before finishing the sentence. He wasn't stupid, only practiced. I watched him locate the cameras, then locate me, then decide he hadn't looked. His jaw made the small mistake I'd known since childhood, the micro-movement a body makes when the script slides an inch out of reach. Applause from a nearby cluster faded early, an attention tide that no longer obeyed him. I let the war room wash in again. Numbers are kinder than families. They do not pretend. I remembered chilled air on my wrists, the pen slightly too heavy, the case's hinges swallowing the sound of completion. Every sealed page had a gravity of its own. Enough of them make weather. I learned to live beneath it, to carry it in daylight without showing it. I didn't need the world to agree with me. I needed the world to be correct. That is the discipline of the unseen. Know the difference between recognition and rightness, and choose the latter, until the former is forced to follow. He knows the truth too, he just never admitted it. The band tuned a fragment of the anthem. Flags shivered. A reporter angled for a cleaner line of sight, and then, reconsidering, dropped the camera an inch, as if remembering etiquette. My parents sat still. My mother's hands porcelain, my father testing a new century, and finding it already his. The envelope Rayburn passed me waited under my fingers' edges, cool seal, unbroken. The paper inside would not fix a family, but it would fix a record. I rested my palm there, feeling the thin architecture of proof, the quiet weight of a future that might finally balance the books. Around us, a hush crept across the rows, not silence, but a recalculation counted in glances, tightened mouths. Rayburn's shadow covered my shoulder like a standard steady. Every secret eventually finds its moment in the light. Make sure you're here when the next revelation drops, so hit subscribe and follow me into the next chapter. They called me a deserter because my own mother cast the net. Intermissions scattered the ceremony into 100 small conversations like shards of glass catching sun across the courtyard. The band fell to tuning in the distance. Servers passed lemonade and coffee. Reporters drifted with their recorders tucked low as if that made them invisible. I stayed near the fountain where the spray stitched a fine mist over the hedges and cooled the stone under my heels. A pair of guests stopped within earshot, their voices careful, but not careful enough. "Didn't she leave the Navy?" one asked the question, wrapped in concern but tied with curiosity. The other made a small sound that meant rumor had already done its work. My mother arrived as if choreographed by etiquette pearls, calm, smile, steady. Rebecca chose civilian life, she told them, each syllable polished. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. The story had been groomed for years. All she had to do was let it walk. A microphone leaned closer. "Could we quote you, ma'am?" The reporter's tone was soft, respectful, predatory. My father stood a pace behind posture, approving eyes fixed on the horizon of a past he preferred. Claire reached the group late, breath quick, a flush not entirely from the heat. She gave a small wave that found no landing place, but Daniel once said she saved his unit in the Gulf. The words escaped like a plate slipping from wet hands. She tried to catch them, but sound is quicker than fingers. Silence pressed at first, then peeled back with low voices. The guests exchanged looks. The reporter straightened. A second recorder blinked red. My mother's laugh came bright and paper-thin. "Claire is nervous," she said. "Ceremonies do that." Claire's eyes flicked to me, apology visible and useless. I kept my back straight, my hands loosely clasped over the folded coat. The fountain stitched more mist into the space between us, veil thin. No help at all. Someone asked, "Is there documentation?" The young lieutenant who had whispered earlier stared at his shoes as if answers might appear in the shine. I said nothing. Silence has a shape. Today I wore it like formal dress. But I watched the net my mother had cast sag under the weight of a single wet truth. The mesh that had held for years began to widen strand by strand as people remembered a flicker of a headline, a rumor that resisted the preferred version, a glance at the stars on my shoulders that refused stage lighting. The courtyard altered its angle. Conversations that had been tilted toward Daniel settled level. A camera lens re-aimed, then held still as though the photographer feared catching something undeniable. My father cleared his throat. My mother touched his sleeve, warning and reassurance braided into one gentle pressure. I thought of the war room ink, settling signatures cooling, and felt the old discipline rise. Facts do not rush. They arrange themselves, then enter. I did not reach for proof. I did not even glance at Rayburn, though I sensed him at the edge of the crowd, the gravity that made orbit possible. Deserter, someone mouthed, trying the word against their teeth and finding it bitter. The sound turned back on itself and died. Margaret drew breath to complete the lie she had nursed. The reporter raised her recorder again. Wind lifted the edge of the anthem from the bandstand, a torn ribbon of sound that fluttered across the courtyard and fell. Slowly. Boots clicked behind me. Rayburn arrives, slips a thin folder into my hands. When the moment comes, use it. A name isn't given, it's carved, earned, and carried. The VIP lounge held the ceremony's breath. Fluorescent light hummed over hooks. I set my coat on a chair and broke the red seal. Inside, paper smelled of toner and time, my signature arcing across the Gulf report, crisp as a blade. Dates, sequences, orders cut, emitters, decoys, 5 East, slow 3, stood in neat columns like a truth at attention. Rayburn closed the door with a soft click. He didn't crowd the table. Gravity followed anyway. He glanced from pages to me, confirmation enough. For now. Some truths don't wait for permission. His voice was low, practical. You don't have to say a word. Just be accurate. I brushed my thumb over the ink, half hoping it would blur and let me off the hook of being seen. It didn't. In the corridor, footsteps paced toward the stage. The band rehearsed a clipped bar and fell still. You were quiet for a reason, he added. Being quiet isn't the same as being absent. Silence had been armor. Worn too long, it impersonates skin. In the mirror, a woman looked back with the steadiness of someone who had practiced disappearing until the day required the reverse. I heard my mother, "We don't talk about Rebecca's career." I folded the folder and slid it inside my jacket. No speeches, I said. No theatrics. Precision is a kind of mercy, Rayburn replied. The ceremonial officer entered, cap-tucked eyes quick. "Ma'am, sir." He nodded, recalculating without fuss. "We're at 2 minutes to honors. Seating is set." I remembered my fists in that coat outside, the old reflex to hide, and lifted it now only to press the creases flat. I checked my collar, the bars, the angle of each pin. Breathing settled in on 4, out on 4. Teach the body the speech the mouth won't give. In my pocket, the paper warmed with me. I didn't need to wave it. Records do their work when the room is ready. Evidence is a tide, it arrives. Shorelines redraw. A memory skated across the glass, me as a girl with a tin of polish cooling my palms, while Daniel learned to make leather shine. I had thought the trick was pressure in circles. The trick is time you rub until the dullness yields its surface. I tightened the bun at my nape, and let my shoulders rise to their true height. Light struck the metal on my shoulders and came back steady, not boastful. I rolled the stars once with a cloth, a small private ritual. Not to dazzle, only to be legible. "Ready," I said. Rayburn opened the door. The corridor smelled of wax and flags, voices braided and straightened as protocol assembled. He fell a step behind my left shoulder where gravity reads as companionship. I chose the simplest plan. I would walk where I was meant to walk, accept the salute's procedure demanded, and let the cameras do arithmetic. I would not correct my mother or lecture my brother. Rank would translate what love had refused. The name on the page would remain where it belonged, and the room so sure of its story would correct itself to it. The officer touched his headset. 90 seconds. We waited 3 silhouettes arranged by duty, the witness, the conductor, the subject stepping into definition. I smoothed the lapels once more and centered the folder's weight against my heart, a reminder the organ wasn't alone in keeping time. Beyond the wall, the crowd rustled, a sea of fabric and expectation. I could feel the turn beginning the moment when erasure surrenders its last inches and retreats. Loudspeaker, prepare for the honors salute. One salute can silence 1,000 lies. The square held its breath the way a drumhead holds tension taut, waiting to be struck. Brass mouths gleamed, sticks hovered, flags snapped in the spring air like bright verdicts. I stood at the aisle with my coat unbuttoned, the weight of the stars steady on my shoulders, the folder's edge a calm rectangle against my ribs. Rayburn stepped forward. He didn't clear his throat or raise a hand. He simply gave the day its new direction. "Admiral Hale, front and center." Gasps moved through the rows like wind passing wheat. Chairs skidded, caps straightened. 100 small calculations completed at once. Instinct outran rumor. Officers rose before they knew they were standing, palms, finding brows, chins lifting to the angle protocol demands when truth enters a room. I stood. The aisle opened, no velvet rope, just attention. I took the step I had owed myself for years. I did not look left or right. My mother held her poise by habit. My father worked his jaw around a new fact. Claire pressed a crescent into her program. The young lieutenant from earlier snapped to an irrepressible attention that aged him by a decade. Salutes caught the light and returned it in clean lines. I answered each with the economy I had used to write orders in a war room: no flourish, no hunger. Cameras swung, found me, hesitated, then held. The band did not play. Even music understood it was not the first responder here. Halfway down, I felt the floor settle the way a ship finds the right seam in a wave. I had walked halls where my name was a password with no door. Now each step made a door visible. Every inch of fabric remembered its purpose. The stars were not ornaments, they were grammar. People who had known me only as a rumor discovered they had been mispronouncing the sentence. Rayburn remained at my shoulder, a shadow that clarified rather than obscured. At the foot of the stage, he stopped one pace back and ceded the center to the office that had earned it. I climbed the 2 steps without touching the rail. The presiding commander met my eyes. No flinch. His right hand rose, crisp, absolute. "Admiral Hale." The square became still enough to measure. A camera shutter clicked like ice forming. Faces that had known how to smile now learned how to listen. I returned the salute, elbow clean, wrist straight, the way you return a gift that belongs to the giver and the given in equal parts. For a heartbeat, I saw the war room's blue glow in the reflection of his iris, and understood how the unseen arrives in daylight, not with applause, but with alignment. I lowered my hand. The commander lowered his. A child's flag stopped mid-swish. Margaret's pearls flashed too bright. Robert looked younger by 5 hard seconds. Claire exhaled. I didn't seek Daniel, but the tilt of attention revealed him caught between stage lights and a world that had just redrawn its map. A ripple of relief touched the enlisted ranks. The young lieutenant's shoulders sank 1 notch, as if a weight he hadn't known he carried had been lifted. The press line recalibrated. Questions dissolved into captions. The record began to correct itself before anyone wrote a word. I felt the folder's stiff spine through the cloth, but I didn't need to show it. Evidence is only dramatic to those who doubt. To the rest, it is simply accurate. Bandsticks tapped wood 1-2. A breeze moved the flag enough to show the stitching that keeps stripes from fraying. I thought about the girl with the shoe-polished tin, about the woman who learned that silence could be armor until armor became unnecessary. I thought about the map that had not bled the men who went home because numbers obeyed the difference between being thanked and being believed. I faced front. There was nothing to announce, nothing left to ask for. The room had done its arithmetic. I felt the results settle over the square like shade. Daniel's microphone slips from his hand, echoing in silence. I didn't need applause. I needed truth to stand upright. The stage felt newly built, the air held rigid as if extra breath might bend it. The flag snapped once and went still. My coat lay over my arm. The folder pressed a square seam against my ribs. I repeated the vow from the quiet room: I wouldn't attack, I would only reveal. Precision, not spectacle. Daniel stepped toward me with the smile I knew from childhood photographs, good for posters, bad at weather. Up close, it fluttered, unsure where to land. The microphone he'd dropped rested at his feet. The cable, a dark question. He stopped a pace away, careful to keep the angle where cameras could pretend we were siblings sharing tenderness rather than plates correcting themselves. No one told me. He muttered the words, fraying on the edges. You never asked. I let it sit, not as a knife, but as a fact that needed no sharpening. The audience took it like a coastline taking a wave. He tried again, voice lower. I thought you left. We all did. They said they... I tilted my head. The stars on my shoulders didn't move. Rumor is a lazy historian. His jaw tightened, an old habit bobbing up like a buoy. He glanced at our parents. My mother held her pearls as if they were rope. My father stood at attention to the past. Claire waited behind him, eyes full of a forgiveness I hadn't asked for. I never meant to take anything from you, he said. Things just arrived with my name already printed. The map arranges itself for the ship that shows up, I said. Showing up is not the same as deserving. A murmur traveled the rows. Brass buttons flashed. I heard the band captain hold his sticks. Rayburn stood off my shoulder, present the way granite is, not hinting, not intruding, simply existing, so lesser things know where to stand. Daniel's voice thinned. If I'd known you did know enough, I said, remembering the report that aired with his credits stitched on like a borrowed patch. Knowing isn't always detail. Sometimes it's choosing not to notice. He swallowed. We were told you were out, that you'd quit. I didn't look at our mother. The square didn't need the obvious. I served where attention isn't currency, I said. That's all. He searched me then, as if a softer answer might live under steel. I let him look. The longer he searched, the more the stage revealed itself, not a platform, but a scale. You had a version of me that worked for you. I let you keep it. That mistake is over. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The words carried because the stillness carried them. Somewhere a camera operator loosened his grip. A child's flag drooped and held. A faint click went through the ranks as if unseen switches flipped from story to record. Daniel pressed his lips, then tried a different route, the diplomatic one. What do you want me to say here? Nothing for me, I said. But there are sailors who deserve to hear their lives weren't saved by a myth. There's a family who deserved truth before it was convenient. And there's a man on this stage who deserves the chance to be better than a story that flatters him. He colored under the lights. The old competitiveness flickered and died. And if I apologize, he whispered, does it change anything? It changes you, I said. Which is the point. I felt the audience leaning in, not for blood, but for balance. The urge to humiliate rose like heat and fell like discipline. I kept my hands easy, my shoulders level. I was not a prosecutor. I was a door left open. Wind lifted the flag's edge. The fabric whispered like paper turning. Let silence finish it. He took a breath that sounded like surrender, learning its first word. He looked past me toward the rank that had spoken in a language he finally understood then, back at the sister he had misnamed for years. Rayburn shifted his way to signal only to me enough. I nodded without moving. Daniel lowers his gaze. The audience holds collective breath. I didn't seize their seat. I rewrote the command chain. The Pentagon's secure strategy room felt like a lung between breaths, sealed and waiting. Summer pressed on DC, but in here the air ran cold over glass tables. Rayburn stood at my left shoulder. The generals settled. The Secretary of Defense arrived last, and the room corrected its posture. Pacific Hybrid Ops, I began. Stop treating cybersea airspace and narrative as lanes. Fight the seam. Redundancy as policy, not apology. Decoys. Cross-domain failsafes. Decision loops cut from days to minutes. Logistics that can take a punch and deliver one. I slid a folder across. My signature from the Gulf report showed beneath the plastic edge like a tide mark. The wall woke choke points lit satellite paths, braided comms windows blinked. I walked them through the wargame blue going dark initiative under spoofed beacons strength, hidden in plain algorithmic sight. A general tried to cut in. I outweighted him. We don't muse, I said. We model. We test until the map refuses to lie. Rayburn nodded once. The secretary leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes on the place where improvisation ends and doctrine begins. This is doctrine level, she said. The sentence landed and spread. I handed over the orders to make it real budget lines authorities, a chain that lets action flow without begging permission from the past. Signatures moved like a weather front. When the packet reached me, I added mine, ink steady. The title beneath matched the room, Commander Pacific Hybrid Operations. Recognition didn't feel like thunder. It felt like a balance sheet reconciled after years of honest numbers. I thought of the girl with polish on her palms and the woman who chose to be correct instead of seen. This wasn't applause. It was alignment. We ran contingencies, earthquakes at Guam cable cuts, disinformation spikes, masking kinetic moves. I answered with methods, not adjectives. A deputy asked how to sell austerity in peacetime. You don't sell fire drills to people who haven't burned, I said. You run them so well they stop asking. The meeting dissolved into taskings. Chairs scraped, orderly, relieved. Rayburn touched my shoulder, brief as a stamp. Outside the SIF, the corridor smelled of wax and printer heat. A life that used to happen to me now arrived when called. The secure handset chimed. A personnel bulletin scrolled. I read it twice. The board had removed Daniel from the next promotion slate. I let the news settle where it belonged, not as revenge, but as physics. Consequence can be cruel when it's late. It is still consequence. I felt for the boy who learned to shine shoes while I learned to vanish, and for the officer who let a myth do his heavy lifting. Mostly I felt the room hold steady. Fairness, when it finally walks in, doesn't knock. It simply finds its chair and sits and stays. Across the glass, the secretary was already assigning lifts and timelines. The world continued as it should. I gathered the packet, the pen still warm. Through the windowless wall, I pictured flags snapping the square of air that had decided to honor accuracy. Some truths take the long way around to arrive on time. My phone vibrated, personal line, the old number nobody uses by accident. I didn't need to check the sender to know the shape of what it would ask. I stepped into the hall where the hum of the building hid private sounds. For once, we sat together without pretending. Sunday light pooled in the kitchen like honey catching steam from roast chicken. The table wore its old scars, a knife mark, a water ring, as if it remembered us. I took the chair that used to be mine by proximity, never by invitation, and waited for ritual to set. No one reached for the TV remote. Robert folded his napkin. Margaret set out extra forks no one needed. Claire poured water with care of someone crossing thin ice. Daniel stood at the counter, sleeves rolled, carving like a man grateful for something his hands could fix. The hush that once starved me felt tonight like room. We passed plates. The first kindness was practical bread, warm salt within reach. When small sounds had built enough trust, the clink of cutlery, the slide of dish, Daniel cleared his throat. He didn't look at our parents. He looked at me. I asked for the liaison spot, he said. Under you. The words made a dry crack inside the silence. He set down the knife. Not a shortcut. I need to learn where decisions actually get made. Margaret's eyes flicked to me, searching for a script that didn't exist. Robert's jaw worked, caught between old pride and something he hadn't practiced. I let them wait. The room had never waited for me. The new chain of command could begin here. You'll be held to standard, I said. No shadows to hide in. No myths to carry you. Good, he said. I could see the boy who polished shoes and the officer who had enjoyed light he hadn't paid for. Both were caught in his throat. We ate. The chicken was simple, perfect. Butter softened the beans. Lemon found the vinaigrette. Margaret reached for the pepper and with a small tremor let her hand fall over mine. Warm, tentative. We were wrong, she said, the pearls at her throat suddenly heavy with the years they had stood in for apology. About so many things. I held her gaze. I didn't rescue her from the sentence. Robert raised his glass half-inch, then lowered it, settling on words. You built it? He said, each syllable placed like a foot on new stone, not inherited it. A thin ache moved through me, old and clean. Not triumph alignment. Claire smiled into her lap, relief thinning her shoulders. I stood to refill water just to feel the floor under my feet. The walls showed the same photographs they had always shown. The difference was in the light. This time it crossed the frames and found the table. I didn't need to be in their pictures. I needed to be in the room on my own terms. Daniel's voice followed me back to my chair. If I'm under you, there'll be people who say I only. They'll talk either way, I said. Do the work. He nodded. Something in him settled like a bearing finding north after years of spin. Dessert was a plain cobbler. We ate it without ceremony. No one mentioned the parade or the article that would run in the morning. The quiet was not absence, it was choice. I set down my fork and met the moment head on. Don't fix the past. Just don't repeat it. No one argued. A siren threaded the neighborhood and faded. Claire gathered plates. Robert stood to help. Margaret let him. Habit loosened its grip by inches. Daniel reached for the bottle, then paused. He checked my face the way a pilot checks wind, respecting the air he's about to move through. He poured with care, and when every glass had enough to mean something, he lifted his. Daniel raises his glass to the sister who rewrote the standard. I wasn't fighting for a seat at their table, I built a new one. The West Wing smelled of paper and coffee, the kind of quiet that carries decisions. I stood at the head of the briefing table with no slides, no props, just a map in my mind and a spine of numbers. The president listened the way sailors watch weather eyes on vectors, not drama. I outlined the posture for the Indo-Pacific, the seams where adversaries hide the cadence we would use to move faster than rumor and slower than regret. Cross-domain redundancy, decoys that make greed bite air, a command loop trimmed from days to minutes, tight enough to hold in crisis, flexible enough to bend without breaking. Questions came clean and hard. I answered in clauses built to carry weight. Rayburn sat to my left, still as granite, leaving the space to my voice. When I finished, the room didn't applaud. A better thing happened. Chairs slid back. Pens met paper. Authority shifted from maybe to yes. The president rose, shook my hand once, and said, "Clear. Do it." Outside, spring light sharpened seal. By afternoon, orders had shed their drafts. The chain was live. The budget knew its lanes. I walked past portraits that had stared down storms older than me and felt neither imposter nor heir. I felt employed. Dusk found me by the car window, Washington receding to lights, the city reading itself as a network of signals. My phone buzzed a message thread with a name I could recognize without seeing it. A photo loaded the brick front of my old high school, a banner stretched between two poles, letters tall enough to contradict history. Earned, not inherited. Below it, the marching band kids pointed and laughed, not unkind, merely amazed that a sentence could pull a corner of the world into shape. "They're quoting you now," Daniel texted. I looked at the image until it stopped being pixels and became a place. The banner didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like calibration. We had been off by degrees. Now the horizon was where it belonged. Traffic pooled on the bridge, leaving me long enough with my reflection to take stock. I thought of the tin of polish cooling a child's palms, of the printer heat in a sealed room, of a courtyard where rumor met its first obstacle, of a salute that felt less like victory than geometry. I thought of a kitchen table and a glass raised because language had finally learned our names. I typed back, thumb steady. "Then let's make sure the signal leads somewhere worth following." Night thickened into the Navy Yard water, taking the lights and holding them without comment. Beyond, the fence hulls slept like patient animals. Rigging ticked in a breeze that smelled of iron and tide. Rayburn walked with me as far as the pier and left me there, understanding that solitude can be ceremonial too. I leaned into the railing and listened to the harbor report itself. Chain on cleat, halyard, knock a gull's late opinion, the low electric sigh of ships ready to wake on command. A phone vibrated, not urgent. Somewhere a watch changed boots, trading the hour with quiet economy. I breathed in salt and steel and a promise I had finally phrased correctly, not to be seen but to be useful. Not to win, but to align. I stood for years in silence, erased by the very people who should have known me best. Yet in that silence I built the strength they never imagined I had. Now, as the truth finally stands upright, I ask you, have you ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you didn't belong? Leave me your words. Tell me how you found your voice, or how you're still searching for it. Your support matters not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been cast aside. Together we prove that dignity isn't granted, it's earned. And once earned, it cannot be erased.